Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for people to enter, and we will get started. Good morning and afternoon, depending on where everyone is located. I'm Kristen McKenna. I'm the Executive Director for CAI, and welcome to Dr. Mather's session, our second one of the day. So we're very excited to have you join us, and just had a few reminders before we start the session. So we are monitoring the chat feature through Whova. So if you're on the Whova platform, make sure that you put your questions in there and we'll be monitoring them that way. Dr. Mather will take questions at the end of the session, but Dr. Ortiz and Dr. Flanagan will probably be answering throughout as well, as they know. All sessions are being recorded and will be available on demand after the conference. We'll go ahead and send emails out as they are available. Handouts are also uploaded for Dr. Mather's sessions. Those are under the session, so log in there. The surveys and quizzes are located in each session description as well, and you can complete them at the conclusion of the session. We do need quizzes for everyone for CEs. If you don't need CEs, then don't worry about it. And you do not need to fill out the CE request form if you attend live. That is only for on demand. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email us at caisite@gmail.com. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Ortiz.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending upon where you are. I have the distinct pleasure of getting to introduce my close friend and colleague, Dr. Nancy Mather. And by way of introduction, if I have to introduce Nancy Mather to you, then I don't know where you've been living, probably under a rock in a cave somewhere, because Nancy is one of those people for whom you can truly say that no introduction is necessary. So Nancy, I hope you don't mind if I skip all your professional accomplishments and rather say that I am heartened and privileged to be able to introduce you in your presentation today, because I've known you for a very long time and have been influenced greatly by your work and have collaborated with you on many things as well, for which I believe my own career has been greatly enriched. So I am going to say thank you for donating and generously agreeing to appear here and bringing your time and expertise on the WJ5, particularly the achievement section and the virtual test library. You have a lot of people that are very excited to hear about this, myself included, and I am going to turn it over to you while I recede into the background to answer the questions that people are likely to present. So without further ado, everybody, please help me welcome Dr. Nancy Mather. Nancy, it's all you.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Sam. Really appreciate that. Wonderful to be here. I really enjoyed Kevin's session. You know, it's kind of funny. It made me think back. I think, you know, Kevin and I've been working together 40 years or so, but back in the days when we had overheads and we'd put them on an overhead projector, I don't know if you remember that, and the font would be about 12-point font. It'd just be this teeny little print, you know, and you would slap these overheads up. And I remember being at a conference then, and Kevin then put up some overheads where the background, instead of just being plain, was green. And I was like, wow, that is really cool, green. But, you know, watching today, how well he could like move slides around and little videos embedded and things like that. Seems like we've come a long way. So I'm not quite as technically sophisticated with my slides as Dr. GV is, but so anyway, one other quick little overhead story. I had my big pile of overheads and I was in Boston and for a conference, you know, big stack. I'm walking across the street. I slip and my overheads go all over the street. And I had to present in about 15 minutes. I remember just thinking, my overheads, not I'm going to get run over. But oh, anyway, it's so much nicer now with computers. So before we start in, you know, this has been about 10 years ago now, but I think we'd all like to be, you know, in the Maldives. So, you know, I had a friend who was working for Handicapped International, Dr. Ron Briette, and he said, come over and, work a week in the Maldives and help me screen, the Maldivian children for disabilities. Okay, well, this place is, beautiful. There are like 70 atolls that have resorts on them. So, it's just incredible. This is the honeymoon suite. You see how pretty that is? And there's a little ladder there down into the water. But they say in 50 years, that these islands will be gone because of, global warming. So, they're really trying to shore it up. So these kids, I mean, they were so cute. They speak English. They don't wear shoes to school because it's just, sand outside. It's kind of funny because their mothers are peering through the windows, watching what they're doing. So my job is, I'm the memory tester. And so I'm supposed to go like 5, 1, 5, and then, the child's supposed to do it back. And if they can't do 3 digits, you go down to 2. If they can do 3, you go up to, 4. And so we screened about 400 children. And out of that, there were about 12 children that just really couldn't do the task. And, you start thinking, it's like, why couldn't these children do this? They couldn't even do 2. It's like, is it memory? Is it attention? Maybe they're just afraid. Here's this old lady. But it just kind of made me think about how advanced we are with assessment, in this country that, we really are so advanced in terms of understanding how to determine why a child is struggling and, as importantly, what we should do about it. So I'm going to describe the new tests. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the old tests and the achievement, as well. I'm going to talk about the tests and new tests that are in the virtual test library. And then focus a little bit too on how the WJ5 can be really useful in terms of, a dyslexia evaluation. Now, that's a javelina. You probably don't have javelinas, where you live. But the other day I was driving down the street. Okay, now look,
That's smart. It's like 6 smart.
look at these guys. So they come up, they eat your plants. Anyway, interesting little creatures. So, here we have the school psychologist, on the way to work. And so one of the really nice features now about the WJ5 is really the main things you need is your laptop, and an iPad. You do also still need a response booklet because there are several tests where the student actually, does do writing. And so, those are the tests in the response booklet. So calculation, spelling, math facts fluency, sentence writing accuracy, applied problems, written language samples, sentence writing fluency, math problem identification, spelling the sounds, and letter writing fluency. Okay. So when you get on the Riverside website, there's a lot of resources there. And so there's videos you can watch in terms of teaching you how to do things. The examiner manuals are there. There's quick reference guides for scoring several of the new tests. And so there's just a lot of resources available when you log on to the platform. So the response booklet, you can either print it out in color or order it in color. And there's only about maybe 9 pages or 8 pages or so that are actually in color. Or you can, print it out in black and white, either way. So there's a picture on the screen. It says, when you see this picture on your tablet, means you don't need to look at the tablet. You can just listen. Do you have any questions before we start? And before you start the test too, you'll notice it says there, please confirm the starting point. And so it'll set to the age or grade of the person you're evaluating, but maybe you know that the student needs to go lower than that or higher than that. And so you would change that starting point before you would begin the test. So just a couple of days ago, my colleague and good friend, Dr. Lynn Jaffe, and I invited little Justin to do an evaluation, of Justin. And so this is a picture that's on the screen, when nothing is happening. And so he was kind of cute. He said, I like that picture.
Do you know what that animal is?
I think it's a chihuahua. And never mind, it's just a sloth.
It's a what?
A sloth.
That's right, it's a sloth. Yeah, very good. All right.
So,
Okay, Red.
so he knew, he knew it was a sloth, which, again, I don't know. That's pretty amazing. I would think at that age to know that that's a sloth. So the WJ5 achievement has a selective testing table where it shows you again, all the tests that are in the achievement battery and which clusters will be formed, when you administer certain tests. So there's a selective testing table for the achievement battery, for the virtual test library, as well as the cognitive battery. So not all the WJ5 tests will be released at the initial release of the WJ5. These are tests that will be coming out later in the spring and fall. And so some of the tests again that we see won't be available till a little bit, later in time. So the initial release, though, will provide the 8 IDEA SLD areas. And so you will be able to get those 8 areas in terms of your testing. And one thing it just kind of reminds me of too is the importance of using the word specific when we talk about reading disability and we talk about a learning disability, that this addition of the word specific implies that there's just a couple of things. It's not everything. So that there's a few things where the student is really struggling, but, it's not everything. And so it's just kind of a reminder that when we're talking about reading disabilities, learning disabilities, that we really want to say specific when we talk about those. So the new and modified WJ5 achievement tests, one I'm really excited about is oral language samples, story comprehension, paragraph reading comprehension, math problem identification, magnitude comparison, sentence writing accuracy, and letter writing fluency. Several tests have been modified. So number sense has been added in, and that was on the ECAD. And the 3 tests, science, social studies, and humanities, now have been assembled into academic facts and academic vocabulary to give you the academic knowledge cluster. And so now you have academic facts and academic vocabulary that are going to make an academic knowledge cluster. Okay. So oral language samples is a test of oral expression. It measures expressive language ability. Requires the examiner to respond orally to examiner prompts while they look at a picture or text on the iPad screen. Early items require 1 or 2 words, then simple sentence. Later items require a complete sentence, and they do increase in complexity. So it starts out with 1 word, then 2 words, then complete sentences. So, tell me a good sentence about what's happening in the picture. Okay. So here we have Justin.
Tell me a good sentence about what's happening in this picture.
The mother bird is feeding worms to their babies in the nest.
Very good.
Okay, so the mother bird is feeding worms to her babies in the nest. So again, you can see that's a 2-point response, and you can see that his oral language is very good. So when Juan packs his lunch, he takes 3 things. First, he packs an apple. Finally, he puts in a bottle of water. And so you say a sentence is missing from this paragraph. When Juan packs his lunch, he takes 3 things. First, he packs an apple. Finally, he puts in a bottle of water. Tell me a good sentence that would fit in the middle. Okay. So as you score oral language samples, the first couple items are just, 1 point. And then after items 16 and on, it's 2, 1, or 0 points, okay? And so listening to their response, you select a score, whether it be 2, 1, or 0. And you do give them an example, where you provide, so you say, this is a complete sentence, but now listen to a sentence that has, more detail. I want you to add in more detail. So to get 2 points on that one, you'd have to have a complete sentence that uses a transition word. 1 point, a complete sentence doesn't use a transition word. 0, incomplete sentence, or adds on to the first sentence. So these were Justin's score. You look at oral language samples there. His RPI 9590, standard score 112, percentile rank 79. So, we have a good idea that his oral language, is intact. Okay. So kind of one thing I just want to mention here is, don't forget to look at the RPI score. So we have a 2nd grader and a college senior doing word attack, okay? They both have the same standard scores, same percentile ranks. And then you look at your grade equivalents, and if I'd say to you, who's more behind, you'd say the college senior, but then we look at their RPIs. And so the RPIs really tell us, again, it's our 2nd grader we're really concerned about, not as much the college student. When we think about 6th grade word attack skill, that's not so bad. So we always want to make sure, we do look at that, RPI score. And so this just kind of reminders of the RPI score and the verbal labels, for the PI scores, both in terms of proficiency and then implications, regarding the task. Very advanced proficiency, those types of tasks would be extremely, easy for the student. Or maybe they have an RPI of 2490, their proficiency is very limited. Math problem solving or whatever it is would be extremely difficult, for the student. So don't forget to look at that, RPI score. So there's 2 new tests, story comprehension and paragraph reading comprehension. As Kevin mentioned, story comprehension can be used in the cognitive battery or the achievement battery. And with it, you listen to and answer questions. And so one of these formats, you listen to it and answer questions, and the other you read and answer questions. And so those are 2 new tests in the achievement battery. So one of my favorite tests too is math problem identification. And so this is a math problem solving test, and there's 2 types of queries, what is wrong and tell me what's missing. And so it starts out with problems like Darius has 3 blocks. Emily has 4 blocks. Darius says he has more blocks than Emily. What is wrong? And so we see again a measure of reasoning, language, and again, the problems kind of, progress. Jaden was asked to count backward from 10 to 1. He said 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 2, 1. What's wrong? What's wrong? And then problems get, much more difficult. Set of 30 numbers has a variance of 9, standard deviation of 3, range of 11 to 20. To the nearest whole number, what's the mean? What's missing? Coordinates of the line at the equation y equals bx are plotted. Line crosses the x-axis at the coordinate 3, 1. What is the slope of the line? What is wrong? I probably couldn't answer some of these myself. But anyway, so it does get, very difficult. So it's a new measure of, math problem solving that will go with applied problems to make the math reasoning cluster. As Kevin mentioned, another new test that we're excited about is magnitude comparison. It's timed for 2 minutes, and you have to choose the bigger quantity. And so, it starts out with simpler kinds of things, and then advances, to numbers with decimal points and fractions, and things like that. So that's a time test, for 2 minutes. So a brand new test, a measure of basic writing skills, is sentence writing accuracy. It measures dictation, spelling, punctuation, and capitalization. The examiner has to listen to a sentence dictated by the examiner and then write that sentence, from memory. Okay. So each of the items is scored for 4 categories. So it's administered in blocks there. So this is block B, test items, 6 through 15. And you see over in the right-hand column there, dictation, spelling, capitalization, punctuation. And so you get 1 point for, each of those categories. Okay. All right. Okay. So here's our little friend doing sentence writing accuracy.
Look at this sentence. It says the cat naps. The first word of the sentence is capitalized. All the words are spelled correctly, and the sentence ends with a period. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to write some short sentences. You'll hear the sentences from your speaker. First, you'll hear a beep, then the sentence will begin. When the sentence is over, you'll hear 2 beeps. Please write exactly what you hear. Write this sentence.
I go.
I go.
You write on this line here.
Go, go, go.
I,
A. J.
Well, as you can see, we're not getting very far with this. So this is what he ended up, writing. So wasn't able, to give him sentence writing accuracy. So he's 7.5 years old. It's his second year of first grade. So he has been retained because he wasn't learning to read. And so again, it's his second year in first grade. So, here we see his scores just in terms of, spelling and sentence writing accuracy, RPI 5 out of 90, 72, 56 for the standard scores, basic writing skills, first percentile. And so quite a bit behind, as you can see. All right.
Spell the word in, please.
So here we have, just to show you how we did on spelling, okay?
Spell the word in. Please get in the car. In.
In the car.
No,
Anything
just spell the
change?
word in. In.
Oh, just in?
Uh-huh.
So that's at
Just
the bottom
in.
line there.
Okay, so in, N. It's gonna be an N.
Mhm.
All right. So you can see he just wrote the letter, and then, for in. So, here we have a 17-year-old doing, sentence writing accuracy. His handwriting, makes it, very, very difficult to score. So one of the things is we can see he, uses capital letters practically in every sentence. So he's going to get zeros, on most of the capitalization. So, isn't that a beautiful rose? Okay, he's pretty good in terms of getting dictation accuracy. His spelling is pretty good if you can read it. And, again, his writing style is such, that he does use capital letters in all the sentences. Now, we might not be too concerned about this, particularly if he has keyboarding skill and things. It's, he does, have dysgraphia. So kind of interesting when we look at written language samples, the his sentences, again, are really, really good. Now, this test was called writing samples, but we changed the name to written language samples to make it parallel with the oral language samples test, to say, these are really kind of the same format, the same kinds of items, but one is oral language and one is written language, so that you would have that nice comparison between how do they do when they can talk about it versus when they, have to write it. But the exquisite aromas emanating from the kitchen were a delectable surprise, okay? Few people understood the extent of his disappointment, the loss of his desire, or the level of apathy that had settled in. If you're considering a gift for a significant other, you might consider a bouquet of flowers. And then at the end of this one about the Iceman, he says, the findings provide an invaluable insight into the daily life of the Iceman's culture, the depths of knowledge contained within. And so we see he's really an excellent writer. He just has pretty severe dysgraphia. And on sentence writing fluency, again, he does quite well, but it's very difficult to read his writing. Now, he also had difficulty in terms of, calculation. And so, he got to fractions and he's like, I don't remember, how to do fractions. Okay. And so he didn't really understand decimals, etc. When we kind of look back, I tested this fellow earlier, and this is when he was in 5th grade, and this is, what his WJ4 writing samples look like. And so you can see it really, has improved. What are things you'd like to do on the weekend? And he wrote, watch TV, play Nintendo, and, fall down the stairs. But what's interesting is he's a good artist. This is back, when he was like in 7th grade, he's just, and so it's just, you think, how can you draw so well, and you have such difficulty, with letters. And so, he's a really, really good, artist. So another new test is WJ letter writing fluency, and this is a test of alphabet writing. Requires processing speed, fine motor control, letter knowledge. There's 2 items. Each has a 30-second time limit. First item requires writing the alphabet from memory. Second item requires copying the alphabet, from a model. Okay, so the first item again, you write the alphabet, from memory. That's Delia. She's 5 years old. Okay, and here's Peyton. She's 5 years old. And this is when she has the model there, to copy. Okay. Here's Roger. He's 7. And then here's Justin, 7. But you just again kind of look at the difference in terms of skill level in terms of writing fluency. And then here's another student. So there have been several research studies that have really documented the importance of this automatic letter writing with typically developing writers and individuals with dysgraphia. So slow letter writing fluency impacts obviously handwriting speed and affects and predicts the quality of composition. So I think this is going to be just a really nice additional assessment to use with our students as age 6 to 9 in terms of delays in, letter writing automaticity. So I know Kevin talked a little bit about, semantic word retrieval, and it is in the cognitive battery, but I just want to show you something a little funny that happened the other day. So the test requires examiners name 1 minute as many categories as they can think of that belong to a category. Okay, so here's, you say, now I want to tell you all the different animals you can think of. You'll have 1 minute. When I say begin, say the animals as quickly as you can.
Lions and tigers and bears. Oh
Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Oh my. Anyway, and so the achievement battery, you've got basic reading skills, reading fluency clusters. So letter word ID and word attack. Reading fluency, you have sentence reading fluency, word reading fluency. And so both of these clusters are very important when we're thinking about children struggling with reading. So accuracy and speed, word recognition, pseudo word reading, absolutely essential for understanding whether an individual is experiencing reading difficulties. And so this is Dr. Jaffe giving letter word identification.
What's that word?
Oh, that's gonna be on.
Did you read it?
Oh. Okay. That is actually H. Oh. On. So.
Okay. And then
What's that?
2 more words here.
Ah. Um.
Mm.
Okay. O. It. Mm. Mm.
What's the word?
And so you just see again, how difficult this is, and how far behind he is. Okay. So we've got again the phoneme grapheme knowledge. You're familiar with word attack, spelling of sounds, and then we've got spelling skills. We've got spelling and spelling of sounds. And then, so here's our 17-year-old. And, actually he's a pretty good speller. It's just that his handwriting, is so difficult to read. So when we're thinking about, dyslexia, two of our most important clusters are that phoneme grapheme knowledge and spelling. So we also want to analyze nonsense word reading, word attack. So being able to apply grapheme phoneme correspondence works for the majority of words, 80% of monosyllabic words. It's a productive strategy to assist in learning to read. So we want to see how well a child can read nonsense words, okay? So Dr. Coulthard had talked about there's really 3 steps in reading pseudo words. And I think it's important we call these pseudo words or nonsense words and not non-words, because non-words, could be 7M, 8S, or, it could be anything, but pseudo words and nonsense words are words that do conform to common, English spelling patterns. So I think we want to avoid the word non-word. But anyway, the first step, grapheme parsing. You break apart a letter string into its grapheme. Second step, you assign phonemes to those graphemes. And then the third step is you've got to blend those phonemes together to read the pseudo word. And so you want to be thinking about, as you're watching students, what are they having difficulty with? So first step, grapheme parsing, you break it apart into its graphemes. Then you assign the speech sounds to it. And then you blend it together, to read the nonsense word. And so students have different problems with this, for different reasons. So you kind of want to be watching, what's difficult about this for them. And it might, be blending. Now, this is a quote from Stanger and Donahue back in 1937 in their book, Prediction and Prevention of Reading Difficulties. But they said this blending process will be very slow at first. In fact, it's the most difficult step to the whole teaching procedure. It's also the most fundamental step thereof. Mastery of individual sounds is comparatively easy, but the ability to blend these sounds into recognizable words is often very difficult. It'll come, it always has come. As an aid to this blending process, it's been found very helpful to have some sort of movable letters. I find that very interesting. This is again back in 1937, and it's exactly what we would say today. It's very helpful, to have some sort of movable letters. And so, one thing we see about Justin now, too, he knows some of the phonemes and graphemes, some, but he can't blend the sounds, back together again. And so one of our recommendations will be, we really have to teach him how to sound blend. Okay, so now we have him, on word attack. He did okay with the letters, but then when we get to blends.
What sound did these letters make together? What sound did these letters make?
What?
What sound did these letters make?
Yeah.
What sound did these letters make?
Eh.
So, as you can see, he knows, some of the sounds, but he has no idea, he can't, doesn't know how to blend them together. And so, again, as we know, one of our recommendations is going to be, teach him sound blending. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the International Dyslexia Association, definition of dyslexia. It's a specific learning disability, neurobiological, uh, accurate, fluent word recognition, poor spelling, Difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of the language, often unexpected. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension, reduced reading experience, impede growth of vocabulary, and background knowledge. And so there's lately been quite a bit of discussion regarding it's really time to revise, this definition. 2 decades later, we know more. So a recent article by Dr. Katz and others, talked about, changes that need, to happen to this definition. And then these were, the points that they made in terms of, revisiting this definition. So there's a multifactorial causal basis. We need to acknowledge that there's factors beyond phonological awareness that affect reading and spelling development. The prevalence rate is 5 to 10%. There's severe persistent problems, word reading accuracy and speed. We want to explore cognitive precursors for early intervention and treatment. As we know, early spoken language difficulties are a risk factor. And secondary consequences include academic failure and the psychosocial impact, of dyslexia. We can already see and feel some sadness in terms of Justin, when he tries to read, that it's just, so difficult for him. And so consensus in terms of the definition of dyslexia. So it is a neurobiological difference, affects the development of basic reading skills, automaticity with sound symbol connections and spelling. There's often specific weaknesses and linguistic risk factors that predict poor reading and spelling. Lifelong condition, effective interventions do reduce the impact. Many other abilities are intact. They can, even be advanced. And as we all know, it affects both motivation, and self-esteem. So it is the most common specific learning disability, and 70 to 80% of referrals to special education involve concerns, about reading development. So Henselwood, wrote a book back in 1917 on, congenital word blindness. And he was a Scottish ophthalmologist. And what we really see, the first people to really study dyslexia were eye doctors, because parents would bring their children to eye doctors and say, what's wrong with his eyes? He can't read. And so our early history about dyslexia really was with eye doctors. And it's interesting, Henselwood said back in 1917, back then it was called word blindness. There was also word deafness, but with the possession and knowledge of the symptoms, little difficulty in the diagnosis of congenital word blindness when the cases are met with, since the general picture of the condition stands out as clear-cut, distinct, is that of any pathological condition, in the whole range of medicine. That's back in 1917. And so more recently, Dr. Shaywitz has said, diagnosis of dyslexia is precise and scientifically informed as almost any diagnosis in medicine. So on the WJ5, we have our, primary and secondary reading, spelling, and writing difficulties. And so the primary areas you're going to see difficulty are letter sound associations, learning letter names, letter sounds, basic reading skills, reading fluency and rate, and spelling. Secondary consequences of having dyslexia are weaknesses in reading, comprehension, and written expression. And so we do see this movement to a multiple deficit model, away from being only phonological awareness. So Dr. Fletcher and others says, research shows the primary academic skill deficits lead to identification of dyslexia, problems with the accuracy and fluency of decoding skills and spelling. Cognitive research identifies reliable correlates, predictors of these marker variables, most robust being phonological awareness, but additional cognitive processes involve rapid naming of letters and digits, as well as working memory for phonological material. Okay. And so the best neuropsychological model of dyslexia, one that includes multiple deficits, none of which is both necessary and sufficient to cause dyslexia. So associated cognitive difficulties, phonological awareness, rapid naming, nonverbal processing speed, verbal short-term memory, vocabulary, other language skills, are common. And so we're really moving to a multiple deficit model rather than, a single deficit model in terms of, our understanding of dyslexia and what contributes to difficulties, learning to read and spell. So linguistic risk factors, these are the specific cognitive linguistic abilities that contribute to reading and spelling difficulties. There is no one linguistic risk factor that can rule in or out a diagnosis of dyslexia. We have some students who have trouble with phonological awareness and they read well, and so just because you have a linguistic risk factor doesn't mean necessarily you're going to struggle with reading because there's, so many other factors involved. We do know low scores on multiple linguistic risk factors increase the risk for reading and spelling difficulties. And I think, we've all had those cases where, we see, it's phonological awareness, it's rapid naming, it's processing speed. They're all low and you just think, oh boy, this student's going to be hard to teach to read. So, Dr. Alan Kaufman, and, talking about the need to look at the cognitive abilities of students when we think about learning disabilities, so that there's a demand for comprehensive assessment to drive intervention. And it's the way it's always been, the way it'll always be. Referral questions for children with specific learning disabilities have always asked, what's wrong? How can we help? These questions demand differential diagnosis. Large part is determined by the cognitive abilities, present in the individual child. And so we do want to look at some of these cognitive abilities. So in a dyslexia evaluation, as you all know, family history is a key risk indicator. It's our earliest indicator of the student is at risk for dyslexia. What is their educational history? Have they had past tutoring and interventions? Were there past evaluations? What, happened in those? We see that again, 40% of individuals with dyslexia have another comorbid disorder. Developmental language disorder, ADHD, and dyscalculia are the three most common comorbid, disorders, with dyslexia. And so in lots of cases, it's not just dyslexia, it's dyslexia and, ADHD. Parent-teacher interviews, you always want to listen to them read, of course, and, look at their written, language as well. So we know there's strong converging evidence. It has a genetic basis. There's not one specific gene for reading. They've identified maybe 6 candidate genes that seem related, but family history is a key risk indicator. So 2 questions you always want to ask in an evaluation is, did anyone in your family have difficulty learning to read? Did your child have difficulty, with speech or language development? And so we do, want to know those 2 things. So, we have these 2 concepts of unexpected and expected reading difficulty. And they're both related, to dyslexia. So the unexpected reading difficulty, that's really our, discrepancy model, where there's strengths in maybe language and reasoning. They predict you should be doing quite well. It's compared to your poor decoding, your spelling, or your slow reading rate, and you have a discrepancy. You typically have intact performance in areas not affected by dyslexia, math, science. And then we've got our consistency model, expected reading difficulty, where the linguistic risk factors predict you're going to have poor performance. Okay, so phonological awareness predicts you're going to struggle with phonics. Rapid automatized naming predicts you're going to have a slow reading rate. And so there's consistency, between the linguistic risk factors and the poor reading and spelling. And really, both of these basic concepts, are related to dyslexia and, are helpful when we're trying to determine, if it is dyslexia. So with unexpected underachievement, reading performance is below what we'd predict based upon other cognitive abilities or vocabulary, math, and this, as you know, is a discrepancy model. So consensus exists. The core of specific learning disabilities is unexpected underachievement. But controversy exists about how do we determine it? Simple low achievement, uneven cognitive development or academic skills lower than IQ or oral language, or, evidence of persistent difficulties. And so there is there's still some controversy about how do we determine unexpected, underachievement. So expected underachievement, as I mentioned, reading performance is in line with your linguistic weaknesses. They predict poor performance. Poor phonological awareness predicts poor phonics. Slow RAN predicts slow reading. And there's consistency then in terms of how the student, is doing. So we're coming to recognize deficiencies in certain cognitive processes are indicators of learning disabilities that predict, therefore result in expected, underachievement. I was listening to Kevin's talking when someone asked about the scholastic aptitude clusters, and that was really their intent, was to predict expected achievement, that your aptitude for reading, is very low. And so that was really sort of the intent of those scholastic aptitude clusters. But as Kevin noted, they, never really caught on. So we want to be thinking about comparing oral language, to reading. Okay, so typically, again, people who speak well read well. And so using oral language as a predictor, comparing oral language to basic reading skills, phoneme grapheme knowledge, reading fluency, and rate. And so when we make comparisons between those, is there, a difference between their oral language and their reading? So Dr. Torgerson said, children should be able to comprehend or construct the meaning of what's being read at a level consistent with their general verbal ability. And so we expect, again, people with good verbal ability, to be good readers. So Ellen's in 3rd grade. This is on written language samples, block A, item 3. And so you look at this and, he wrote the mom is thin. And so if you didn't have the context for what happened here, you'd think, he's got some reasoning problems, okay? But, this is what he said when he wrote this. He says, the man's a king. Uh-oh, hard words. I don't know how to spell those words. The man is rich. Another hard word. I don't know how to spell rich. What do I know how to spell? I can spell mom and dad. The mom is a queen. Oh, I don't know how to spell queen. What do I know how to spell? Thin. Oh, I can spell thin. And so he wrote, the mom is thin. And, we have a large discrepancy between oral language reasoning and his ability to spell. So there's really some nice comparisons between the WJ5 oral language tests and the WJ5 reading and writing tests. So story recall, oral, reading recall, you read. Story comprehension, oral, paragraph, you read. Oral comprehension, you listen. Passage comprehension, you read. Oral language samples compared to written language samples. How do they do repeating nonsense words, versus word attack? And you might even want to look at spelling the sounds too. So how do they do with nonsense words? And so there's really nice comparisons you can do to establish that there is a discrepancy between verbal ability and reading and writing, or that there's not, maybe there's not. So although their skills differ, students with dyslexia have poorer nonsense word repetition skills when compared to aged peers. Reading level controls. It's predicted by their oral language skills. So students who have combined dyslexia and developmental language disorders have the most severe nonsense word repetition impairments. And so that nonsense word repetition, again, is a mixture of auditory processing, but also, there's a memory component, as well. So this is a little bit funny. This was, I had one of my former students call me and she said, she says, that word flabstriction in the nonsense word reading, she said, that it's a real word. I said, really, it is? She said, yeah. She said, it is. She said, it's a real word. It describes what Spanx do. If I get it cheap off brand, they may fall apart and cause deflabstriction. Anyway, it's pretty funny. It's like, really? And you have to sort of laugh sometimes when you look at some of the responses, students give, on written language samples. This is on Despite Her Anger, 3 different students, but despite her anger, she was still going to watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and sing along with him. Despite her anger, she wanted to buy a Corvette. I said no. She got mad. But despite her anger, she went on with her life and lived with a sleazy street punk. And despite her anger, she didn't divorce her husband after he told her he had an affair with 37, other women. And so again, pretty creative responses. And so you do still have your academic skills, fluency, and application clusters. And oftentimes you'll see when a student has dyslexia, their academic applications is going to be higher than their academic skills, or academic, fluency clusters. So, when skills are much lower than fluency and application, maybe again, a recommendation is don't penalize for their poor basic skills. When fluency and rate are below skills and application, the student will need probably extended time or shorter assignments. When applications is lower than skills and fluency, you'll oftentimes have to modify the instructional level and, simplify the material, a bit for a student. So in, terms of accommodations, the most commonly requested accommodation, is to get students, extended time. And so there's several things we'll see on the WJ5 that can really assist you in terms of developing a rationale, for why does a student need extended time. So slow, rapid naming, slow academic fluency, slow reading rate, and then in contrast to, higher oral language, higher academic knowledge, higher academic applications. And so if this student is asked to go quickly, they are not going to be able to demonstrate what they know, without extended time. I I'm to the point, I just wish we'd give everybody extended time, it's like we're really trying to see, do they know it or don't they know it? Not how fast they can do it, but Dr. Horn had said, when we look at young adults, measures in which there's much emphasis on speediness correlate near zero, perhaps even negatively, with tests that require solving difficult, problems. So we do want to make sure that students who need, extended time, which again, most students with dyslexia do, they get extended time. So as Kevin mentioned, there is no WJ5 oral language battery. And these tests from the oral language battery, they were moved into the cognitive achievement and the virtual test library. And as Kevin noted, the virtual test library can be used with either the cognitive battery, or the achievement battery. So, there is a selective testing table for the virtual test library showing you which, additional clusters you can get when you administer tests from the virtual test library. So the virtual test library includes several specific linguistic risk factors. So there's phonological awareness, there's measures of phonological manipulation, there's 5 measures, as Kevin mentioned, of rapid automatized naming tests. There's auditory memory span working memory tests. And then there's the 2 single test, animal number sequencing, understanding directions. And so a lot of the virtual test library really does look at those specific linguistic risk factors. And so, again, it can be used with cognitive battery and or the achievement battery. So several of the virtual test library tests measure phonological awareness, but also require working memory. So sound substitution, sound deletion, sound reversal, these tests all involve manipulating the sounds within words. Changing a sound in a word, deleting a sound from a word, or saying the sounds that the word tap in reversed order. So the examinee has to hold the information in memory, substitute, delete, reverse phonemes to make a different word. And these more complex phonological manipulation tasks are really stronger predictors of reading than our less complex tasks such as blending and segmentation. And so they're just important in terms of, predicting reading performance, and more powerful because they involve both auditory processing, but also working memory. So, blending and segmentation, easier phonological awareness skills. So oftentimes if you would administer word attack where they've got to read phonically regular nonsense word and spelling are average or above average, you really don't need to administer blending and segmentation. I mean, because in order to read and spell nonsense words, you've got to blend and segment. So, but if word attack is below average, you want to make sure you give blending. If spelling is below average, you want to make sure you give segmentation, because we're going to have to teach students like Justin how to blend. And so, and again, what segmentation underlies, being able to spell. So we want to be thinking about the level of development, the difficulty level of the task. Easiest to hear the first sound, then the last sound. Toughest is the middle vowel sound. Easier to work with compound words, syllables, phonemes. That must be for me. Sound blending and segmentation, again, versus, phoneme manipulation task, which does, involve working memory. Okay. I never get calls on my home phone. Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway, so the nice thing about phonological awareness, and it was, Kevin said, I always wanted it out of the cognitive battery because it's trainable. And so, you can have a student you identify and then they get a good phonics program, and the next time you test them, they've got above average phonological awareness. But so we want to recommend direct instruction in blending if they can't blend, segmentation if they have trouble, segmentation. And in general, you want to start the instruction with phonemes, even in kindergarten, and then use larger units if they can't blend or segment phonemes. But, there's some thinking that practice with phonemic manipulation tasks promotes orthographic mapping, being able to form the connections, between the speech, sounds, and the print. Okay. So one nice, exciting feature about the WJ5 are the rapid naming tests. So these are tests of cognitive and linguistic fluency. They measure naming facility, an aspect of processing speed, and retrieval fluency. The tasks are timed. They require the examiner to look at the stimuli on the iPad, then name the stimuli, as quickly as possible. Okay, so each test has a 60-second time limit. It starts out with the sample items, provides corrective feedback if an error is made. If an error is made, a second trial is given. If the examinee doesn't meet the continuation requirements after the sample items, the test is discontinued. So rapid naming tests partially, of course, measure attention, discriminating among symbols rapidly, retrieving verbal labels rapidly, articulating, words rapidly. And letters and numbers are the strongest predictors of reading and spelling. It is distinct from phonological awareness. Contribution is larger, younger readers with more severe reading disabilities. Pause time is significantly correlated with reading accuracy and fluency, where articulation time is not. RAND is more highly related to speeded measures of reading than to accuracy measures. And so, one thing that we see is all time tests are related to each other. And so, again, most, I mean, we shouldn't say all, but again, when things are speeded, they tend, to relate to each other. So RAND is a good predictor of reading rate, not reading accuracy. It also sort of predicts orthographic processing, being able to read exception words, but it is not a good predictor, of phonics skills. Okay. So Dr. Martha Dankler was one of the people who first developed the RAND tests, back in the early 2000s. And so we interviewed her back then, and it's kind of interesting to listen to her talk about this.
Assume that you've heard about the rapid naming tests from other people, and for other reasons, I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of it. It actually was an example of beginner's luck that I constructed this test. I had trained with Dr. Norman Geschwind, who was a great professor of behavioral neurology, and he had told us about the exciting disconnection syndrome, in which a person who has lost the ability to get visual information directly into the left side of the brain and has lost the corpus callosum, the big connecting band between the two sides of the brain, therefore has a kind of a disconnection of anything that's purely visual from some verbal equivalent. And I thought, well, maybe that's something I should look for in little children. So I looked, first of all, for kindergartners who couldn't name their colors yet. I didn't find very many of those. I did very rarely find a child who couldn't name colors at all, which Geschwind had led me to think of as possibly an indication that the connections were not covered with this insulating material of myelin, and so the child wouldn't be able to name the colors. But what I then thought of was something else I'd gotten in medical school, which was a little bedside chart with 5 colors printed on it, which was used for recovery from head injury. And they said, let's take something really, really primitive, like the names of colors. You can even learn the names of colors in Spanish if you have a lot of Spanish-speaking patients. And you would stand there at the bedside and see whether on Monday they took a minute to say 50 colors, and on Wednesday, they took 40 seconds to name 50 colors on this chart. So I said, well, maybe what I should do is ask the children to name colors rapidly, not for purposes of recovery from head injury in this case, but just because perhaps the speed with which they can retrieve the color names would be a delicate indicator. And generally speaking, in translating from adult neurology to child test construction, you have to go more subtle because the developmental things are not as glaring as the adult acquired injuries, thank goodness. But the paradigm was simply to see whether you could illustrate the efficiency of the see it, say it circuit. And then when I started to work with Rita Rudell, she added, let's have a card with 5 objects on it, which she took from the 4-year-old vocabulary of the Stanford Binet at that time, of thinking that if you were starting with 5-year-olds, you wanted to start with vocabulary that was from 4-year-old level, and then the letters and then the numbers. And the basic idea still stands today, which is you're trying to see how robust that highway is, so to speak, between I see something and I say something, which at the very simplistic level is what you have to do when you begin to learn reading. You're always either responding with a unit that we call a phonetic equivalent, or you're responding with a whole word. So whether you're doing sight words or you're doing a letter and its sound or a letter and its name, you are still neurologically traveling down the same circuitry of see it, say it. And we're on the brink of being able to actually see that circuit with some of the methods that we have with magnetic resonance imaging, not just the functional imaging, but actually the physically concrete visualization of white matter using something called the diffusion tensor imaging. So pretty soon we may actually be able to show a photograph of this see it, say it circuitry.
So I think it's a really nice explanation, and when we're trying to maybe explain to parents or things what RAND measures, but it's really that visual verbal highway. Your eye sees and your mouth responds. And what they see, it's really the pause time that's the difficulty. And there's just a longer pause time, which again affects slow word perception. So there's really disruption in the see it, then I say it, circuit. I think Ella kind of captured it here when she said, I have to read out loud. If I don't understand anything I'm reading. Then when I try to read out loud, I look at the word, I know the word, I know how to say it, except I can't get it to come out of my mouth. And again, we can imagine someone like Ella is not going to do, very well in terms of, RAND tests. And so the 5 WJ5 rapid naming tests, rapid picture naming, rapid number naming, rapid letter naming, rapid phoneme naming, rapid quantity naming. Okay. And so couple of rapid picture naming is an old, test, as you know. So rapid picture naming, you have the screen here and this kind of shows
The
you.
test begins with the administration overview, giving you information on how to administer and score the test, along with information about what is needed or available for the test. Then you will start the test.
Look at these pictures. Tell me the names of these pictures as fast as you can. Go ahead.
Hat, fish, flower, star, clock.
Now you are going to see more rows of pictures. Start with the first row and tell me the names of the pictures as fast as you can until you finish. Are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Ball, car, chair, star, eyes. Spoon, tennis shoe, bird, kitty, plane. Horse, door, pig, cap, dog.
Go ahead.
And so, again, and then it stops, automatically after a minute, it stops, and then you click on, where they end in terms of the, last
The test
picture.
begins.
So you've got, the rapid number naming then and rapid letter naming. Okay. And so you click the advance arrow immediately to move, to the next set. And so one thing that I was told, which really is something to know because I don't know where it's printed anywhere, but instead of going down each time, with your computer to hit that arrow, you can just hit the letter N, which moves the screen, forward. So just kind of make yourself a mental note of that. It's a lot faster than dragging your cursor down lots of times, to move, to the next set. And so as soon as they get, to the bottom there, you got to move them to the next screen. But you also can hit the letter N, which, really is, much easier. Now, a new test I'm excited about because nobody really has anything like this. And I think it's going to be, really interesting, is rapid phoneme naming, where you have to say the speech sounds. Now I tried to give this to Justin, but I wasn't, very successful.
Okay, tell me the sounds these letters make as fast as you can.
Okay. Mm.
Okay, good. Mhm. Okay, that's D. You know what's that?
S.
Okay, but what's the sound? Okay, good. And that one?
That is J.
Okay, and so it sounds like. No, J.
J.
Very good. Okay. Okay, tell me the sounds.
Okay, so
No, not A. B. J. B.
All right, very good. Very
Yay.
good. Okay.
Yay, I did it.
so rapid phoneme naming, percentile rank is 7, standard score is 78. But I think one thing we have to think about, with this is rapid naming, you want to make sure they're automatic with the symbols they're naming. And, he's by no means automatic. And so, we'd really want to go back, and I'd want to go back to rapid picture naming because I think he might have the same problem with letters a bit, but letters and numbers and things like that. So if we really want to see he has difficulty with Bran, we wouldn't use this rapid, phoneme because he's still, not automatic with some of the phonemes. So, rapid phoneme naming again, you have it on the screen, you go down and they, name the phonemes as, quickly as they can. But I think this will be a really interesting test with some of our older students who do know the sounds, but again, it's just still, not, automatic. So one thing you have to be a little careful about is when you're pronouncing the sounds, not to add a schwa sound to them. So you don't want to say ma and ta and ba and ka. Now, if the examinee does that, it's still scored as correct, but you want to try to pronounce the phonemes clearly. This is Aaron's 4th grade teacher, and you can imagine when you look at this, what she's doing. I mean, she's trying to help him hear the phonemes, but she's stretching it out too long. And look at dream there, dream, cold, anyway, anyway, so we have to be careful, as we pronounce, phonemes. So rapid quantity naming, this is, going to just, I think, be very interesting in terms of students with arithmetic fluency, issues, but you have to name the quantity, as quickly as you can. And so they have to say the group of dots going across the rows. And if they pause for 3 seconds, you click it as an error and say, do the next one, and then advance the screen, as quickly as possible. And so what we see is predictors of specific learning disabilities in read and math. So we've got rapid picture naming, rapid letter naming, rapid phoneme naming, all good predictors of reading. We have rapid number naming, rapid quantity naming that are going to be good, predictors of mathematics. And so when we look at RAN in mathematics, and that it just hasn't been studied as much as reading. There's just tons of articles on the relationship between, RAN and reading, but it is also significantly correlated with math performance. So this was just a meta-analysis. That comma should not be in that 713 participants. Anyway, but 38 studies, and RAN's a stronger predictor of arithmetic calculation skills, particularly single-digit calculations, and math fluency, compared to general math achievement, multi-digit calculation, and it's particularly a good predictor of arithmetic fluency. And that both alphanumeric, non-alphanumeric RAN tests were strong predictors, of math performance. And so hopefully we'll see more studies really, looking at, how RAN relates to mathematics. So in terms of intervention implications with these RAN tests, we want to make sure they're automatic with the stimuli before administering a RAN test. And so rapid phoneme naming with Justin just didn't work. He was not automatic with the stimuli. He wasn't sure of the sounds of some of the letters, and he, definitely did not have automaticity with the stimuli. So typically when RAN is slow, intervention is usually needed for reading rate and fluency. But then when rate is slow as well, student usually require extended time on exams and, high stakes tests. And so when RAN is slow, we also, always, want to look at reading rate, as well. So, another linguistic risk factor, is auditory working memory. So here we have Tim on numbers reversed.
I'm going to say some numbers, then you say them backward. Okay. For example, if I say 2, 3, 4, you would say 4, 3, 2. 4, 3, 2. Now say the numbers backward. 6, 8, 3. 6, 8. Wait, no. 3, 8, 6. Or 8, 6, 3. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. And so again, we do have these students, where the difficulty, learning to read and spell and things like that is, really weaknesses, in terms of memory. So one thing that we, whoopsie, no. One thing we did create with the WJ5 is a dyslexia test set that gives you preloaded tests, that are related, to dyslexia. And so you've got basic reading skills, phonics knowledge, linguistic risk factors, and, how did they do on vocabulary? You also have the single test of oral reading, nonsense word repetition. And so you're going to see when you log on that there's a couple preloaded test sets where the tests are already in that test set. So you can choose a test set. You can also create your own test set where you can choose the clusters, or you can choose, individual tests you want to give to make your, own test set. But the dyslexia test set, is preloaded. And so I just gave the dyslexia test set to Judith. That's not her real name, but she's 20 years old, and she's in college at the U of A. And she's having trouble keeping up with the required reading for classes. She's having trouble finishing her exams. She never was formally diagnosed with dyslexia, but she does remembering that she had a lot of tutoring and help with reading, throughout school. And so I administered the dyslexia test set, and I'll kind of just show you the results here. So we look at her vocabulary. You've got picture vocabulary, academic vocabulary. The RPI is 9890, standard score 117, percentile rank, 87. And so we see again, just, a high vocabulary, which not surprising again for somebody in college, okay, that's successful. Okay, now interesting, when we look at her basic reading skills, look, they're good. I mean, okay, so letter word 9990, word attack, 9190. And so her basic reading skills, are good. We look at her spelling. Her spelling's really good. Okay, 9690, 109, 72. We look at her phoneme grapheme knowledge. It's good. It's good too. And, we look at her, spelling then, and we actually see, she really spells, quite, pretty well, and then, we look at her spelling of sounds, and, she does, performs, pretty well on that, too. Okay. Then we look at her phonological awareness. Okay. Blending and segmenting, she's fine. But then we look at phonological manipulation here. Okay. Relative proficiency, 6590. Standard score, 85. Percentile rank, of 15. And then we look at her RAN reading. Okay. Now this is interesting because rapid letter naming, look how slow it is. And then look at rapid phoneme naming, it's okay. It's okay. Rapid, picture naming, is low, but RAN reading, is also slow. Okay. So, we look at reading fluency, and this is what the printout looks like when you're on the web. When you download it to Word, it looks like the other way. But so reading fluency, 8 out of 90, standard score 80, percentile rank 9. Sentence reading fluency, 4 out of 90. Word reading fluency, 16 out of 90. Okay. So again, that's what it looks like when you download it into Word. All right, so we see RAN is low, the phoneme manipulation is low, reading fluency is low. And so things we have to think about in terms of, is this dyslexia? Okay, she has a strong family history of dyslexia, father, uncle, and older brother. She began reading tutoring in first grade. She continued having a reading tutor until she was in grade 7. She used MindPlay online reading program at home for 2 years while she was in high school, which taught her again. Her basic reading skills are good, as in her spelling. So she has mastered phonics, but she still reads slowly, and she has weaknesses in working memory and slow RAN. And so when we kind of look at this case, it kind of signals us of we probably want to do additional testing and look at some working memory tests, because little additional testing. So when we use that dyslexia test set, by the time you're done, you might say, I really think I need to look in more detail at something, or there's going to be, some cases where you think, I really want to look at, mathematics too, just because of the high comorbidity. I really want to look at more depth in, oral language. And so, again, so she does have dyslexia. Problems in working memory and RAN. RAN predicts again her slow reading rate. And she's had really, really good remediation. And so we really need to consider how good interventions, affect, test scores and things like that. So with dyslexia assessment, we want to identify our at-risk indicators. As I mentioned, family history is our best early predictor of the students going to struggle. Early speech and language difficulties, the primary areas that are affected, word reading rate and spelling. And so really looking again at their spelling. Are there any specific linguistic risk factors? And the thing is, there may not be. We potentially have additional linguistic risk factors that we don't have good tests for, that we haven't figured out yet, like paired associate learning, or, we've got some areas again, like the visual auditory learning test on the WJ, which probably a good predictor because it's mimicking the learning to read, process. How did they do their ability to learn when reading's not required? So we see with Judith there again, she's got, very high vocabulary. Their emotional and self-esteem concerns, and we want to identify strengths, and we want to determine specific accommodations, and interventions, that the student may need. Okay. So again, we want to emphasize, the importance of qualitative information. Looking at the past assessments, what past interventions, have been done? Is there, a family history? What are the comorbid conditions? And, behavior observations, doing behavior observations. I think we've all probably had the experience of testing a 6 or 7-year-old who's having trouble learning to read and also has ADHD. And it's really difficult sometimes thinking, is this dyslexia, or, is it attention or is it both? And so it really can be complicated in those young kids when we've got both ADHD and potentially, dyslexia. So, this is WJ4, but this is a student, with ADHD, and it's just kind of funny. So this is my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Janice Salmons.
All right, I want to listen to you read aloud. Read as carefully as you can, not as fast as you can. If you come to a word you cannot read, just do your best and then go on to the next word. Start here and read a story about bees.
A story about bees. Bees are little. Bees are bugs. Bees can make wax. Bees have lots of jobs.
Go ahead.
Here is bees. They live in most parts of the world. They have 2 pairs of wings. They are 3 kinds of bees. I know those kinds of bees. The queen is the only bee that is able to lay eggs. I know those types of bees. Squash bee, honey bee, and I forgot bee.
Wow. All right, keep going.
Squash bees just go take as much pollen as they can and go. And if you're in a field, it's most likely to go bee and hit you and run into you.
Okay, keep going.
The largest and most important bee is the queen. The work.
Anyway, so you also have on the website, the resources, there's a WJ5 teacher checklist that you can download, and a parent checklist you can download to give to teachers, and parents. And so there's a checklist for teachers that you can get some additional qualitative information for. And then there's also this checklist that you can download, for parents. So you have that additional information as well. As we all know too, just the importance, of doing error analysis, because you can have two students who get the same answer, but the way they approach it, is different. And so always kind of thinking about error analysis. So this is the applied problems. There's 3 eggs, each of 4 baskets. How many eggs are there in all? Okay, so Joe says he knows what the problem's asking him to do, multiply 3 eggs, by, 4 baskets. He gets the right answer, okay? So Jake is kind of at the semi-concrete level. He doesn't know to multiply 3 by 4, but he knows to count in threes. Eggs per basket, 4 times 4 basket, and he gets the correct, answer as well. Now, Annie's more concrete. She also says 12, but she draws the 4 baskets. She puts 3 eggs in them, and then she counts each of the eggs. And she also, says 12. And so, again, we just see such a difference in how they've approached, this problem. So we want to make sure students who struggle with reading get a comprehensive evaluation, explains the reason, why are they struggling with reading, where is the student developmentally, what type of instruction do they need, phonological awareness, phonics, structural analysis, do they need to work on their reading rate, and, document both strengths and weakness. This is a funny one of a student who's got good GC and GF. Imagine you lived at the same time as Abraham Lincoln. What would you say to him or ask him? I'd tell him not to go to a play ever. Oh, anyway, good reasoning. So just some basic facts, about dyslexia. As we all know, it runs in families. There's high comorbidity with other disorders, particularly ADHD, developmental language disorder, dyscalculia. There's no one linguistic processing weakness that can rule in or out a diagnosis of dyslexia. Early intervention is critical. Effective treatments provide intensive, explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and spelling. We think of a student like Justin here, the intervention was to have him repeat first grade. And that's not an effective intervention. He needs to be getting intensive, explicit instruction in reading and spelling. He's got to learn how to blend sounds together, et cetera, et cetera. He's very smart. He can learn to read, but he needs intensive, explicit instruction. It is easier to improve accuracy than reading fluency in individuals with dyslexia. And many individuals with dyslexia, as they enter post-secondary school, they'll still need the accommodation, of extended time. So clearly dyslexia affects self-esteem and motivation. And we, want to make sure that students have, highly trained reading teachers. I sometimes have had to say to parents, you need to hire a tutor. Just because I know the student's not, necessarily going to get what they need in the school they're in. And I hate saying that because I'd like to think, with all of our schools that kids would get the kind of, help that they need. So Dolce said back in 1939, failure to learn to read as others do is a major catastrophe, in a child's life. And, it really is the impact it has, on self-esteem, and motivation. So Philip Schultz in his book, My Dyslexia, said, My ignorance for my dyslexia only intensified my sense of isolation and hopelessness. Ignorance is perhaps the most painful aspect of a learning disability. And so I think it's really important when we determine that a student does have dyslexia or characteristics consistent with the diagnosis of dyslexia, that we explain to the student what it is, we explain to their parents what it is, and we explain how we're going to help them. And I think we've all been sitting at staffings where we're explaining to the parents, dyslexia and what it is. And one of them will say, oh, that's just like I was, or that's like Uncle Sandy, or that's like my mom, or, again, there's always a family member that, pops up as having, similar kinds of problems. And they may not have been diagnosed too. And so, you can always ask too, did, anyone in your family, have trouble learning to read and spell? But again, it's very important that we explain dyslexia, what it is, how we're going to help the students. I was working with Matthew, and he's in 5th grade. And I said, Matthew, write for me what you like about school. So he sat there, and didn't write anything. I said, okay, write what you don't like about school, He finally, picks up his pencil and he writes, school is fun at recess, And I thought, that's it. That's the case. That's the case when you can't read. That school is not a lot of fun, when you're struggling with reading. And so we do want to make sure all our children, learn to read. Reading is my superpower. We want all our kids to learn to read. And as we all know, kids want to learn to read. So this was Philip's New Year's resolution. He says, I promise to read more. I want to be a reader. Again, all of our kids, want to be readers. So Kelly Sandman Hurley said, best way to advocate for a child with dyslexia is to be so well trained, informed, no one can or wants to argue with you. And so as much, as you can know about dyslexia, and the WJ5 really just has some really nice features for assessing abilities, they could be impaired in students with dyslexia. So Dr. Woodcock always said, primary purpose for testing should be to find out more about the problem, not just to get a score. And so he really encouraged us to look at, what's the problem? What's the problem? And WJ5 can kind of really help us in terms of figuring out what the problem is and then figuring out how do we address the problem. So Cruikshank said back in 1977, diagnosis must take second place to instruction, must be made a tool of instruction, not an end in itself. And so we want to make sure our assessment results lead to intervention. And so again, there's so much WJ5 can help us with in terms of linking the assessment results to intervention. So Stanger and Donahue said back in 1937, if these tests will give us a basis from which we can start to understand a child's difficulties, they'll have justified the time spent on them. Anything which helps educators or parents to understand any phase of development or lack of development is of immeasurable value. So you think again, that was back in 1937. And then you think today, the tests that we have today, the tools that we have today, and how with each iteration, they become, more powerful and easier to administer, and broader in terms of, what they capture. And so it's a very exciting time in terms of looking forward to the WJ5, and it's relief. So, I really appreciate you listening through this, and I know you're all looking forward to using the WJ5 when it is released, but we'll take some time now and see if people have some questions. Maybe.
Hi, Nancy. I'll wait and see if Dawn would like to come in and do the moderation, but there are some questions that we can run through. I was adding a few of my own as I'm not adding, I was addressing a few of them on my own, but I'll go ahead and get it started, and maybe Dawn will jump in. Let's see. The first question, well, there was a comment. Elizabeth was happy about a change that was made, I think, with the writing. Because it had been frustrating to have teachers and work samples indicate writing problems and then have average scores on written expression. So the new organization of that is something that I think people look very favorably to. Let's see. Kathleen asked, regarding the option to print the booklets in color or black and white, which way was the test standardized, or was it a mix of both?
So it was standardized, as my understanding, the color version was used. Yeah. And so one of the things that I found you could do, is there's just certain tests you can just print out in color. So some of the, again, a lot of the booklets pretty much the same, whether you do black and white, but you may want to print out certain, tests in color. It may not make much difference whether you use color or black and white, but I don't think we know that for sure.
Although maybe color might be more engaging for the child, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's I'm thinking with younger kids that the color probably, is more engaging, but probably with older students, it probably doesn't matter as much,
Thank you. And Nancy Padula asked, is oral reading fluency no more? The answer was probably so. Right?
Is oral reading fluency no more?
That's yes.
Oh,
The subject itself.
I mean, so, there's a reading fluency cluster, and it's sentence reading, and word reading fluency, but that is silent reading. There's the oral reading test, but it's a single test, and so there's probably not an oral reading fluency cluster.
Right.
And so again, that might be something where you want to add in some curriculum-based measures and things like that, just in terms of listening to oral reading.
Okay. Charlotte asked, does the examiner laptop need to be a Mac, or is there an option to use 2 iPads instead? Or is that a question for Erica?
Yeah, it's probably a better question for Erica, but it doesn't have to be a Mac, I don't think. And I'm pretty sure because you can log in on the iPad, so I'm pretty sure you could do iPad to iPad, but let's save that question for Erica.
Okay. And I don't know if this was addressed or not, but Dr. Judith Whitfield asked, as we move through, is there a difference between the new WJ achievement reading portions versus the test of dyslexia? You're Todd. As a solo practitioner, I have a limited budget, so looking for some advice on the difference between the reading portions of the WJ achievement and the TOD.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to talk about the TOD tomorrow. So if you can tune into that, then you can kind of, judge for yourself. But, they are different, and they have kind of different features. And, with the test of dyslexia, its sole purpose is to evaluate reading. So, there may be some kind of different kinds of tests than there are on the WJ, but they both have, tests that are valuable in terms of doing a dyslexia assessment.
Let's see. Erica Castell had a quick comment. She said, is a neurologist who does the brief Kaufman, so the K-bit, and the WJ reading mastery test, yielding all average scores, but a parent reports a cousin has dyslexia, would yield a dyslexia diagnosis. So I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but her comment was doctors are diagnosing without thoroughly assessing. So I'm thinking it had to do a lot with your mentioning that dyslexia has a very strong family component, and it was one of the first questions that you recommended be asked in an evaluation.
Right, right. But, again, so if one, family member has dyslexia, there's about a 35 to 50% chance the child will have dyslexia. So it's not a given that if a parent has dyslexia, the child will have dyslexia. So, you've got to look, at more things. But, usually when you have two parents that have dyslexia, the child's going to have dyslexia. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and that happens sometimes. And so, usually again, both kids will have dyslexia, but, not necessarily. And so again, we always have to think about multiple factors and things when we're thinking about genetics and dyslexia, but family history is one of the, strongest, predictors. And so that can sometimes, again, help tilt the scale for you, a bit.
Thank you. Vicky Sotas asks, do we know if there will be a WJ5 version of the essentials of WJ achievement test of achievement?
Well, it's funny, we're working on that right now. We're supposed to have the manuscript in by the end of March. It will be, the essentials is going to be WJ5 essentials. And so it's going to be the entire test, not just achievement in oral language like the last book. And so it's going to be, cognitive achievement virtual test library. And Erica is going to be the lead author, and then me, and then Joel Snyder is also going to contribute in terms of chapters on, CHC and CHC interpretation. And so I think it, it will be very helpful. So yes, there will be an essentials book, but probably won't be out till next fall, I would guess.
Good. Catherine Passion asks, does the program record the students saying the letters in the one test you were looking at?
Right. And that is one nice option of the digital platform is there's voice capture, which you can turn on, or off. And so in terms of capture, I'm not sure if you're asking about capturing what the examinee says.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just really handy because sometimes it's hard to score things on the fly and you need to go back and listen more carefully. But so there is voice capture where the audio is, stored.
So it is captured for what the examinee says is
Yeah.
there somewhere.
Yeah, you can turn on voice capture, and so then you can listen again to the audio, files. And so, sometimes like, with nonsense word repetition, it's hard to score it right then because it's just like, oh, I got to listen to that a couple times, to know, did they say that just right or not? So you can go back then and re-listen to things.
Let's see. Jim Hansen, hello, Jim. Glad to see you again. Haven't seen you in quite a while. He asks, is there going to be an orthographic processing composite on the WJ5? He says that Dr. Mather used to let us use spelling of sounds and letter pattern matching as a marker.
Oh, hi, Jim. It's great I wish I could see you right now, but it's great to hear from you. There's not, really an orthographic processing cluster factor per se on, WJ. But, the interesting tests like looking at, letter writing fluency, of course, spelling. How they do on spelling the sounds, processing speed tests and things like that. But there's not per se orthographic processing.
And there's an update on Nancy's previous question regarding the reading fluency cluster and oral reading test. Erica did jump in and say that the oral reading test is still available. And she was noting that you have sentence reading fluency with word reading fluency to get the aggregate scores. Her question was supposed to be, is the oral reading test still available? Because it's very useful with reading fluency with the older students. And yes, apparently it is. So
Yes, yes, yeah. The oral, I thought they asked if it was a cluster was available, oral reading. But yeah, but definitely the oral reading test is this, singleton test that is available and, very useful.
Okay. Diana Vieska, I think, pipes in. She says, just wanted to ask if there were any plans to update, let's see, Diana, I can't quite understand what you're asking, to update about the bateria 4 anytime in the near distant future. I'm thinking she's asking about updating the bateria 4 to the bateria 5. So, Diana, if I'm wrong, please jump in and type your question again so that I could read it properly. But I think she's asking whether there are plans for a bateria 5 upcoming. She said yes, sorry for the type. Okay.
Right, and so as of this date, there's talk about, I think, updating and creating the battery of 5, but nothing I know about. The process hasn't started in terms of test development things, as far as I know. But I hear, there is talk about, that would be sort of the next test that would happen, but.
Okay, and Erica had a follow-up question here. How do you suggest dealing with students with low IQs and low working memory as far as reading instruction goes?
Well, low IQ, good reading instruction is good reading instruction. And, again, when students have lower IQs and problems with memory, it's just slower, more repetition, more practice, but you really do the same, kind of thing. And so it just may be you slow your pace down a bit, you review a lot more, you practice a lot more, and but you would do similar, reading instruction because, to learn to read, you do have to master these certain, basic skills.
Question came in from Megan Galante. Is the ECAD still able to be used since the number sense test was moved to the WJ5? What measure would you suggest for aging out preschool students?
Well, the ECAD is still able to be used. And the concept of that test essentially was moved over because the ECAD, there's specific, age grade range, but number sense now again was expanded to, cover a, wider age and grade range. So it's a different test. So, you could still use, the ECAD. If you did the ECAD and you did number sense, I probably wouldn't bother to do it on WJ5, right? But you can still, use the ECAD.
And there is a question, although I don't think it's necessarily directed absolutely toward you, Dr. Mather, from Elaine Gerber, but I'll throw it out there anyway, because you could be a good start. She's asking for some help in general, I believe. And she noted that working as an LD specialist at a community college, so with adults, they don't offer students actual interventions or reading support for students with dyslexia. So she's asking, does anyone have any good resources to give these students so they can get help as adults?
Well, yeah, I mean, so she's right. Lots of times there isn't an intervention then. But what I would encourage you to look at the Mind Play program that is for adults as well too. And it starts out with a diagnostic assessment and builds an individualized reading program for you. It's something an adult can do at home, 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And it's kind of Orton Gillingham based. It's, very, very effective. And We did a study with community college students who used it. And they used it over just a 5-week period. They made really good gains. And it was funny, this one gal spent 65 hours on it and she went up four grades in terms of reading skill, but she was so desperate to learn to read that, you know, she she spent so much time on it. But that's really effective, you know, and it works well with adults and older students because, you know, they can sit with headphones on, nobody knows what they're doing. And again, it'll build a program just for them. So that's a really good intervention, and it's not very expensive. I'm not sure exactly what the cost is now, but it's like the individual program, I think it's $25 a month. There's, you know, so it's really cheap. Yeah.
All right, well, that's a good start then, and our time is up. Nancy, I want to thank you again personally for being here and for sharing your expertise and your time with us. Much appreciated. It's great seeing you. Wish we could see you in person, but it's even good to see you there with the blue background. You just look radiant and wonderful as always. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's so good to be here with you. So,
yeah. All right, everybody, we are done and we'll be on to the next session. Erica will be conducting that one on the WJ5, and a lot of questions that we weren't able to answer that are of a technical nature. Hopefully you can pass them on to her in the next session. So thank you. See you all shortly.